All right, so we're recording this for our speakers at an AVA event. It's going to be disseminated on our social media. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Ryuji. I'm an animal advocate, founder of a small media nonprofit in Japan, president on the board of directors of Vegan Hacktivists. And in general, my work has revolved around making animal issues accessible to people and explaining the issues that we're trying to communicate in a way that's easy to understand and engaging and memorable.
And you've talked at a few AVA events, to my knowledge. I think I've had you at least a AVA LA or DC, and then you've also spoken at Asia Farm Animal Day last time. Is that?
Yes, that's
I'm
correct.
remembering. Okay. So how do you typically prepare for your talks? Do you have a process or an idea generation that you go through?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that I think about when preparing for talks is how is this going to be useful to the audience? So in animal advocacy, we often ask people to look at the world through the perspective of animals. So we say, what is it like from the animal's perspective? And in the case of giving a talk, I think it's about asking, what is it like from the audience's perspective? And the most important thing is that for me, the way that I think about it is the most important thing is how can I be helpful or useful or bring value to the audience that I'm talking to? And so, for example, specific examples of how this will manifest is instead of thinking about everything that I want to say, I'll think about what is a realistic thing that my audience can take away and actually use or actually remember, and then center my talk around that. And it's not about saying everything, because if you think about your experience listening to a talk, probably you don't remember every single detail that was talked about. You remember a few things here and there. And so it's unrealistic to expect your audience to remember everything anyways. And so the point is not really to be like, how can I say as much stuff as possible? How do I say everything? The point is, what are the few main takeaways that I want my audience to take away from this? And how do I communicate that as clearly as possible? So I think that's the most important thing that I do is I think about it from the audience's perspective. And then everything from like the ideas to like how I present things is all designed to be as useful and easy to understand for them.
So that actually flows really well into our next question. I was going to ask what factors you typically consider when you're choosing a subject, but it sounds like audience selection and the key takeaways are really the starting point, and all other factors fall from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I've had times when organizers have asked me what I want to speak about, and I'll always ask, who's the audience? Because it's not about me talking about what I want to talk about. Like I can do that in my room alone or in the shower. But if I'm giving a talk to an audience, it has to be useful to them. So like I always think about that, and pretty much like that's pretty much the only factor I take into consideration is who's the audience and how can it be useful to them.
Did you ever have a talk where you either had a lot of research you needed to do beforehand or a lot of prep work? How did you handle? Was it particularly challenging? What did that prep process look like?
Sure. So in my case, the talks that I have done have been about topics that I've either already done a lot of research on or something that I've had a lot of experience with. So in the case of speaking at AVA, for example, I've spoken about effective communication and media. And that's something I've been doing for the past like 15 years plus now. And so I think that at the point when you're considering giving a talk, I don't think that that's when the heavy lifting should be done in most cases. And I think that the most like it's gonna be difficult, and you're gonna have a lot of work to do. But the point is not to come up with a talk idea like I want to do this talk, and now I have like a year's worth of research to do. It's more so what is it that I have a lot of experience about? Like in the case of AVA, it's about I guess it depends on who is giving the talk and like what it's about. But in my case, for example, it's about transferring a skill or a certain set of skills. And in this case, it makes more sense that instead of having to do a lot of research on media or communication at that time, I've done it for a very long time, and so I'm able to speak about it. In the case of communicating animal issues to a general audience, I typically talk about topics I spent a lot of time researching already for like a separate thing that I've done. And so I very rarely do research specifically for a talk.
Yeah.
It's more so something that's a subject that I'm very familiar about, either because I have a lot of experience or I've done a lot of research for some other reason. And then when I'm giving a talk, it's about how do I synthesize all that and make it as easy to understand as possible.
That's incredible. So speaking of public speaking, it's often daunting for a lot of our speakers. As you know, a lot of our speakers, this is sometimes the first stage that they've had, and we do speaker trainings with them as well. But for you personally, do you psych yourself up before you get on the stage, or are you cool as a cucumber from the beginning? Because every time I see you, you always seem very collected.
Yes, I think that I've had a range of experiences being a speaker. And sometimes I felt very nervous and scared and anxious. And some other times I felt a lot more confident. And I think the main thing that made the difference is where my focus is. So actually, like when I do advocacy, I kind of sound like a broken record because I'm always talking about the animal's perspective. It's kind of like, it's like this inside joke I have with close friends that like that's pretty much all I talk about because I think it's the most relevant thing. And in this case, I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to say, well, the main thing that differentiates whether I feel anxious or confident for a talk is actually where my focus is. Is it on myself or is it on the audience?
Yeah.
And a lot of the reasons that I've experienced, the reasons that I feel nervous or scared or whatever, is because I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking about how do I look? Like, are they going to like? Am I going to be liked?
Yeah.
Am I going to sound confident? And it's all about me. But when I remember that actually the point of giving a talk is not for myself, but it's for the audience,
Yeah.
and I think about how can I be useful to them, and also you have to think about it. It depends on the scenario, but for example, if you're speaking at AVA, then the people who are coming to see you actually want to hear what you have to say. They actually want to see you succeed. And so that's important to remember as well, that people are there because they want you to do well and they want to learn something from you. And so if I place my focus on, okay, it doesn't matter what I look like or how I sound or what I think about myself, it's rather how can I provide as much value as possible? And when I make it about the audience, that's what helps me the most. This is tougher when you are speaking to an audience that may not be so sympathetic. So if you're trying to communicate animal issues to like a non-animal crowd, that's much more difficult. But I still think in this case that I'll still think about how I can. In this case, like I guess I'll do two things. One is like I'll think about how this can be useful to other people, and of course, like some people don't want to hear about this, but also a lot of other people do. And presumably, like if they're coming to your talk, then there's some level of wanting to hear what you have to say. But the other thing is, in that case, it's just very simple that it's not about me, but it's about the animals. And like again, I just remind myself that I'm not here for me. I'm not here to look cool or to sound good or whatever. But I'm here actually for the animals, and that helps me a lot because it just takes the focus completely away from me. And what I find is that the more I take the focus away from me and onto others, not only do I feel better going to the talk, but actually the talk becomes better.
Yeah. Because all of your talks always feel very personal. It does feel like you're talking with and to the audience, and it feels, even though it's you on stage, it still feels like a dialogue between you and the audience in a way. That's a really hard thing to replicate. So has your approach to speaking about animal advocacy evolved over the years? How have you evolved? And it's okay if you'd like to skip this question.
Yeah. So the way that I've evolved is I've changed my focus. So the reason that I think a lot of people become advocates, myself included, is because we see this issue that we think is very important. And we think to ourselves, I want to advocate for this because it's important. That's the reason to become an advocate in the first place. The problem is that if you look at it from the audience's perspective, most audiences don't listen to something because it's important. They actually listen to something because it's interesting to them, because it brings them some sort of value. I actually got this tip from one of my favorite authors, Malcolm Gladwell, who does a phenomenal job of talking about ideas. And actually, if you look at a lot of his books, what he does is he actually starts out with an assumption that a lot of people have about the world. And through the book, he'll basically say, you have this assumption, but you're actually wrong about it. And he'll do it in a very, very eloquent way. So what I've done, because, sorry, what's that?
He takes you on a journey.
He takes you on a journey. And because I found this so compelling, I've actually gone to try to figure out what he's doing and listen to him talk about how he writes and how he thinks about writing. And one of his main guiding questions is, what is interesting? And to me, that's been so helpful because especially talking about animal issues, what I realized is that at first I would be like, listen, like you all have to listen to this because it's so important. But the way I think about it now is I think about, okay, like I do think it's very important, but how can I make this interesting for the audience that I'm talking to? And interesting is a different word for saying value, basically. And value can come in all sorts of ways. So, for example, at AVA, is going to be something along the lines of you have, like, for example, in my case, I have a certain skill that could be helpful to other people that might benefit from learning about this.
Yeah.
So, how do I actually make it so the value that they're getting actually helps them get better at this skill? That's why it's going to be interesting, because it's going to be relevant to people in the sense that, well, I make videos too. I also have to write something once in a while. And so if this can help me do that better, then it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
In the case of animal issues, it might be relating it to things like values that people already have, or start with stories that people already know or care about. So there are a variety of different ways to do this. But to me, even just asking myself the question, how do I make this interesting, as opposed to, and again, notice how the question, what is interesting, is actually audience focused. It's
Yeah.
actually asking what is interesting for them. Whereas asking what is important is actually self-focused, is actually asking what is important for me.
Yeah.
So again, it all comes back to this like audience focused thing. But for me, the big thing I've changed is going from asking myself like what is important, and having that as the guiding question that guides what I talk about, to what is interesting.
Yeah. I can think of a really good example where you did this really effectively, was in one of your films where you have the fish and you see all the fish and they're struggling, and you look and you see kind of the generalized struggle, and then you target the audience into the one fish, and this one fish is very particular struggle to not get sucked up in the net, if I recall correctly. And it turns what is just a multitude of numbers and absolutely horrifying to this very specific personal and emotionally driven struggle to watch this one fish. And I think that targeting of the scope is something you also do really well. And it's impressive, honestly, because getting the audience to focus on something and get emotionally attached is an incredible skill.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that's I found really helpful is to be able to listen to your own work, or like consume your own work, and think about what it would be like from someone else's perspective. So, for example, because I do, so you can apply this to anything. You can apply this to talks or blog posts, or anything that involves communicating. But so I'll give an example that's related to videos, because I make videos. So one thing I've noticed is that it's very easy for me to assess other people's videos, and actually I do it without even thinking. So if you think about how you watch videos, then probably what happens is that, like, some videos you start watching and they're not interesting, so you stop watching them immediately. Some other videos, for some reason, they're really interesting, so you keep watching them. Some other videos, maybe they're interesting at the beginning, but then you lose interest, and halfway through you're kind of zoned out, and you click off. So there's there's a variety of different responses you have to different videos. And what I found very useful is to become aware of how I consume things. So when I watch a video and I skip it, I'll actually ask myself, well, like, what actually happened here? Like, why wasn't this interesting? And on the flip side, when I see something that's really captivating, I'll ask myself, like, how did this captivate my attention? And the answer is actually twofold. On one hand, there's like certain logical things that happen. So, for example, a logical answer might be, this video promised straight away what it was going to deliver. It was very clear in what it was going to be about. You can apply the same thing to an article. You read the first paragraph, you're like, okay, I know exactly what this article is going to be about. So that can be a very logical thing. But another thing might be like is an emotional response. So as you read something and, like, for some reason you find yourself sucked into it, or for some reason you find yourself sucked into a video, and being able to recognize that emotion, I found very helpful. Not like because now that's given me a way to look at my own work in this way.
Yeah.
Where I can not only look at these logical things, like, for example, oh, like I made this video, but actually, if I watch the first minute, I have no idea what it's about. So that's like a logical thing. But I can actually look at it and pretend that I am not myself, and detach myself from the fact that it's me in the video, and ask myself, like, do I actually feel a similar feeling to what I feel like when I watch a video that actually captivates me? And this is something that I found so useful. Because that's like, if we had to criticize other people's work, I think it would be very, very easy to do. It's very easy to say, oh, like this video, this article is boring. I don't want to listen to it. This talk is not interesting. I would not want to go to this talk. Like, it's very easy, but it's very hard for our own work, because we're attached to it. And because it's like, it's our own thing. So we have this idea that, well, because I want to talk about this, it must be interesting for others. But being able to actually, I wouldn't say objectively, because it's never objective, but being able to actually look at your own work and honestly ask yourself, like, how would this make me feel if I wasn't myself? If I didn't know who I was, and being able to do that, and it's something that takes practice, for me has been incredibly useful in really everything that I do.
I started recording my talks from my laptop when I give them. That way I could go back after the fact and see how many ums did I make? How engaging was this actually? And
Mm.
it was exactly that point of like stepping out and trying to see where I could improve as a speaker and maybe get a little less boring, or maybe don't talk so quickly, because I tend to talk very quickly as I go. And I think that's a really interesting take too, that I don't know a lot of our particularly beginner speakers really think about watching themselves talk, or maybe getting an audience or two to watch them practice their talk ahead of time. And I bet that would be speakers watching. Record yourself at least once. So we're getting to the last. I think this is our last question, probably, other than a quick wrap up of what else would you like to express to our speakers. But have you had a particularly rewarding experience as a speaker in an advocacy space?
A particularly rewarding experience. This is actually, well, I guess, an interesting question, because my first intuition was, well, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why is because I try not to assess my talks or the results of my talks and have that affect how I feel about anything.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not like it's not like I don't feel a particular type of way whether or not, like, I do well or not well, or if it's well received or not well received. Like obviously to some extent it's gonna do something to me, but in general I have this belief that it's not useful to base your sense of accomplishments on things that are external to you.
Yeah.
So for me, like, I'm much more proud of the work that I put into something, or something that I can control. And ultimately for me, it like I kind of approach it the way I approach meditation, which is, my meditation practice consists of sitting for 20 minutes. And the whole point is to do that, and like that's there's no point beyond that. So the
Yeah.
entire point is to just sit for 20 minutes, and like I have these, like, for example, like I might be try to focus on my breath or something like that. Um so depending on kind of like a variety of things, but the point is that the main focus is to actually commit to that practice, and it's actually to do it. And so I never have this thought process afterwards where I tell myself I did well or it didn't go well.
Yep.
To me, the question of whether or not a meditation session went well or it didn't go well is kind of like it's not a relevant question. The session just was
It was.
like
Yeah.
that's it. And that's kind of how I approach my work as well, and my talks as well. And to me, like, that's been really helpful, because I feel like it's just, I've had times when I've been really, really self-critical. I've done this more with videos than talks, because the talk, like, you do it and it's over.
Yeah.
With the videos, like, I tend to be like very, very self-critical, and that's useful on one hand because it allows you to improve the product. So I think it's useful if you're able to be critical in such a way that you look at it as just neutral feedback.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's useful if you look at it as a way to feel emotionally gratified in some sort of way. Um,
It's incredible. That's such a good lesson. I love that.
yeah, I mean,
That's,
I think it's just more. It's just not, even when people say that, oh, that was incredible, or what, like, because you can't have one without the other.
yeah.
So if you feel really great when you do well, or say, like, I made an audience cry, and so, like, I feel really great about that, then also if I do really bad, I'm going to feel really bad about that. And typically people don't want to have that thing where they don't feel bad about something that didn't go well. Well, the
Yeah.
answer to that is that, well, okay, well, then just don't base your sense of accomplishments on, like, how the thing goes.
Yeah.
But
It's a
if you're not gonna, yeah, but then it works both ways. And so, like, if you get rid of the bad, then you also get rid of the good. And, like, when it goes bad, well, it's okay. But when it goes good, well, it's also like it just is.
yeah. You just keep
So
moving
that's
forward.
how I approach it. Yeah.
That's incredible. I love that. Is there anything else that you'd like our speakers, particularly beginner speakers, to know before they head into Asia Farm Animal Day?
I think so, yeah. So I think one thing that really helped me out to understand, like, what it means to speak is that there's multiple layers of communication going on, but the two main ones that I think might be helpful to be aware of is, on one level, there's what you say, and on the other level, there's how you say it. And actually, it turns out that to give a great speech, both are very important. And so what you say is the literal words. And so this is literally you sit down and you plan, what is my outline? What am I talking about? How do I, like, in what order do I put the points? It's things like, what examples do I use? Like, just a really quick aside is that people remember stories and examples, but not actually points that you make. And so telling stories is very, very helpful in conveying any point that you want. So one exercise I have for myself when I give a talk is I'll make a point, and then I'll just have in the talk as a talking point to say, for example.
Yeah.
And so any point that you say, you can just say it, and then you just say, for example, and then you just come up with an example. Or not on the spot, obviously, but when you're preparing. So that's very, very helpful. But that's like what you say. And then there's a second layer of how you actually say it. And I think here, I used to get really caught up in kind of like thinking about like how I'm saying things. And I think one thing that really helped me is that if you think about when you communicate in your life, there's actually times when people listen to what you have to say. And typically this happens, for example, in conversations. In conversations, you often have moments where you're talking about something in such a way that someone is captivated by what you have to say and actually listens to you. And so what this means is that actually, like, this thing that's called charisma, that some people think like, oh, like, I have charisma, I don't have charisma. Like, like most of us actually have a good level of charisma that we bring out in certain situations. Typically, when we feel very confident about what we have to say, when we feel very comfortable with the audience that's um, we we are communicating with. So, for example, if you're talking to really good friends about something that you're both really passionate about, then probably you're just going to talk very charismatically. And actually, being charismatic on stage is mostly, I think, about trying to replicate that in a different scenario.
Yeah.
And so it's what it's not about is it's not about playing a character. So it's not about forcing yourself to do these very specific things like hand motions or speak in a very specific way or remove certain words like it's actually not about things like that. And I think that if you focus too much on that stuff, then you start to look like a character. And I've definitely done this like myself. So like actually like a good example for me is if you watch I did a TEDx talk a few years ago, and because that was one of the only talks where it was basically because it had to be like 21 minutes. I prepared it word for word. And so it was like I was reciting it and I became a character. And I think that that's actually took a lot away from it,
Yeah.
where I feel like it didn't sound natural. And it just like I look like a character in that thing. And if you compare that, for example, to how I'm speaking now, then probably my guess is that this is easier to listen to. But it's more because I'm not trying to be a character. This is how I speak with my close friends.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like it's actually one of the hardest things to do, but just being aware that you don't have to be a character. Like, because what I found is that especially looking at some of my friends speak at AVA and things like that, I'm like, you're so charismatic when you talk to me, but some on stage you're just so different. And I think is because they have this idea that they have to be someone else than who they actually are.
Yeah.
And this is simply not the case. And so this is kind of like what I would encourage people to do is just in some situations it's really hard. In AVA, I think it's easier because like hopefully a lot of the people that show up to your talk are people that you see as colleagues or as friends or as things like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, if you want to practice, for example, it's a good idea to practice things like, oh, like, maybe I can increase the range of expression that I have in my voice. Like you can do exercises like that, like beforehand if you want. But on the day of the talk, it's not the time to push yourself. This is
Yeah.
the time to like, you want to, as much as possible, you want to make it about the audience, and hopefully they'll help you relax. And the more kind of like calm and relaxed you feel, and the more you don't feel like you need to be someone else, probably the better you'll do.
I love that because I think we always say we are AVA. And then I think the poor speakers get up there sometimes and they think that they need to be the biggest of AVA and feel like they must take up, like when we accept someone to speak at AVA, we're accepting that particular person for their idea that they had because we think it adds so much value. And it's always so hard to convey to all my speakers watching this that we picked you because they're remarkable and we want them to come speak. And so I really like the idea of remembering that you don't need to be anybody else. We picked you for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Okay. Any final thoughts? Otherwise, thank you for your time. I appreciate you making time to do this for us and for our speakers. Your talks are always, they're really enlightening for a variety of reasons. I know I think watched multiple of your films after the fish one just because it meant so much. And any final thoughts or
No, thank you so much for having me. Hopefully this is helpful, and